And I'm back. This is a middle perch on the internet. I'm MTK on the MIC. It is Tuesday, the 17th of just 2 weeks left in 2019. The last 2 weeks of 2019. You know, the nines have a gravity, don't they? Like, for example, when I was a kid counting for hide and seek, it would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 29, 30. And it's no exaggeration that I have a problem with the calendar we've all been using since I began to understand what time is. It's a huge imposition, the Western calendar, really, tied to Jesus and cemented as universal by the birth of computers, bound ever forward by them. And worse, we do that thing with the 9-10 thing, right? We talk about the 60s and the 70s and the aughts and the century and the decade as if they mean something. And I don't think that's right. And ultimately, people are forced into a rhythm. And whether they want to break free or not, they can't. I could see a long time ago that I would be erased by history because of the timing of my birth. I turned 33 at the millennium, right? My Jesus year was the millennium. So 1 foot in the half my life, 20th, 21st of my active life. There's no way the kids reinventing the 21st century want any part of guys like me anymore. So I knew this irrelevance was coming from a long time ago when I was a teenager, you know? So it is strange to think that I feel somehow good about 2020. I do. I do feel good about 2020. This program, A Middle Perch Live, will be ending at the end of this month, and I will be starting a new manifestation that I'm calling MTK 2020. That's the name right now, anyway. I want it to be dedicated to the mechanics of voting. Okay? So we're going to be doing the mechanics of voting. I am MTK on the MIC, and I was the only broadcast network journalist in the United States of America to project John Kerry, the winner of Ohio in 2004, and thus the winner of the presidential election before the Electoral College met. You can hear all about that on another program, or you can read about that on my archive. But in the new year, 2020, my intention is a nonpartisan look at the mechanics of voting from January 1st to Election Day. And I'm starting to put together how it will look and work here. And, we should probably begin with a nice comprehensive piece which has come out today by Jennifer Cohn in the New York Review of Books. And I'm going to read it in total here because, as I've told previous viewers will know, I was present in the 2000 election that collapsed into Bush v. Gore from a national magazine. I had access to DC from New York. The 2004 election, I was with a massive network. We had, people, and I had set up a structure, which I've discussed before, to do it with the focus on the mechanics. Are we voting fairly? And that ultimately led to me getting the Green Party candidate to come on the radio and declare that they were contesting in Ohio. And we were able to contest. One senator contested. Then I dropped out. And now I'm back. And I'm back in 2020. And one of the things I have history with and knowledge of is politics and covering elections. So I know that one element of what we're doing in the new year will be elections coverage. And so with that, I'd like to take us into this piece by Jennifer Cohn in the New York Review of Books. Jennifer Cohn, an attorney, is an election integrity advocate and writer. And this piece is pretty good. The title of it is How New Voting Machines Could Hack Our Democracy. And she's going to talk about a lot of the things we've talked about already, but with tremendous detail and a nice, organized history. So when we cut this out and stick it up as a single file, I think it's going to be a really useful one. And I'm going to add to it, either later today or in the week, Election Bias by Andrew Cockburn in Harper's, which is about a more specific case. So this is sort of going to be the primer, if you will, and then the second one will be a more specific case. And I think this will lead us into whatever the manifestation in the new year is going to be. Probably not look like this either. Just a warning for those of you who've gotten used to this. This has only been a middle perch, you know. A middle perch is going to eventually end. Why don't we take a few seconds to listen to some music since we're just 5 minutes in, and I will try to find us a good beginning point for this this Jennifer Cohn piece from the New York Review of Books. We're going to read it in 3 chunks, okay? So. Oh, there's some changes to the environment. Okay. How new voting machines could hack our democracy by Jennifer Cohn. The United States has a disturbing habit of investing in unvetted new touchscreen voting machines that later prove disastrous. That's something we fought against. I've talked about. I'll stop doing that. You know, part of being avant-garde for so long and then dropping out is the feeling that when I'm back now, there's stuff that I'll stop doing that. I'll stop doing that. I'll stop doing that. Let's try that again. How new voting machines could hack our democracy. The United States has a disturbing habit of investing in unvetted new touchscreen voting machines that later prove disastrous. As we barrel toward what is set to be the most important election in a generation, Congress appears poised to fund another generation of risky touchscreen voting machines called universal use ballot marking devices, or BMDs, which function as electronic pens marking your selections on paper on your behalf. Although vendors, election officials, and others often refer to this paper as a paper ballot, it differs from a traditional hand-marked paper ballot in that it is marked by a machine which can be hacked without detection in a manual recount or audit. These pricey and unnecessary systems are sold by opaquely financed vendors who use donations and other gifts to entice election officials to buy them. All right, I'll try that again, sorry. These pricey and unnecessary systems are sold by opaquely financed vendors who use donations and other gifts to entice election officials to buy them. Most leading election security experts instead recommend hand-marked paper ballots as a primary voting system, with an exception for voters with disabilities. These experts include Professor Rich DeMilo of Georgia Tech, Professor Andrew Apple of Princeton University, Professor Philip Stark of the University of California at Berkeley, Professor Duncan Buell of the University of South Carolina, Professor Alex J. Halderman of the University of Michigan, and Hari Hursti, who is, quote, considered one of the world's foremost experts on the topic of electronic voting security, close quote, and is, quote, famously known for his successful attempt to demonstrate how the Diebold or Diebold election systems voting machines could be hacked, close quote. We talked about those in 2004. These scholars warn that even a robust manual audit, known as a risk-limiting audit, cannot detect whether a BMD-marked paper ballot has been hacked. BMDs instead put the burden on voters themselves to detect whether such ballots include fraudulent or erroneous machine marks or omissions, even though studies already show that many voters won't notice. For this reason, many analysts have cautioned against acquiring these new ballot marking machines for universal use, but election officials in at least 250 jurisdictions across the country have ignored their advice. Georgia, all 159 counties. South Carolina, all 46 counties. And Delaware, all 3 counties, have already chosen these systems for statewide use in 2020. At least one or more counties in the following additional states have done the same. Pennsylvania, for the most populous county, plus at least 4 more. That's a battleground state, folks. Wisconsin, for Waukesha, Kenosha, Chippewa, and perhaps more. That's Waukesha, Kenosha, and Chippewa in Wisconsin, and perhaps more. Ohio, for the most populous county, and others. Tennessee, for at least 10 counties. North Carolina, for the most populous county. West Virginia, for the most populous county, and at least one other. Texas, for at least Dallas and Travis counties. Kentucky, for the most populous county. Arkansas, at least 4 counties. Indiana, for the most populous county, and at least 8 others. Kansas, for the first and second most populous counties. California, again for the most populous county. Montana, at least 1 county, although not until 2022. And Colorado for early voting. New York State has certified, that is, voted to allow it, 1 such system as well. So these are the latest way or mannerism that we should be aware of. The BMD marked paper ballot. It sounds like it's a pen of some kind. Calling attention to this problem has been complicated over the past few years by vendors, election officials, and election system lobbying groups, such as Verified Voting. Now, I was there when Verified Voting was born, and what they have become since then, I'm learning about here, or have learned about here. And I must tell you, we must pay attention to these details here. Okay, this stuff is important. Calling attention to this problem has been complicated over the past few years by vendors, election officials, and election system lobbying groups, such as Verified Voting, who have blurred the issue by referring to both hand-marked paper ballots and ballot marking device printouts as paper ballots, backup paper ballots, voter-marked paper ballots, and voter verifiable paper ballots. Unless voters are unusually well informed, they have no reason to know that these catchphrases, which is what they all are, repeated by Congress and the media, even I am John Oliver, I assume is what that link is to, can refer to risky new voting machines. Right. That's the one, if you look at these, the first video will be the coverage I did of the John Oliver piece. So we will put that in this playlist first so that this reference will make sense. And her point is that all these phrases that people are using, paper ballots, backup, voter verifiable, voter marked, etc., are catchphrases without definable and concrete meaning to the bigger and more important discussion. The rapid proliferation of these unnecessary new ballot marking machines comes at a time when many voters have already been losing confidence in America's election system. The United States government has acknowledged that Russia targeted election systems in all 50 states before the 2016 election and successfully breached 3 election service providers and voter registration systems in both Florida and Illinois. But the total number of counties breached, 2 or more, remains unclear, and the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the FBI, won't now identify all of them by name. It is unclear whether the government would have acknowledged even this much were it not for the whistleblowing action of Reality Winner, the former U.S. Air Force linguist and NSA contractor who is serving a sentence of more than 5 years in prison for leaking a classified report about Russia's attack on America's election infrastructure. That attack reportedly began in June 2016, a few years after Russia attacked vote tallying and election reporting computers in Ukraine. The Senate Intelligence Committee report on Russian interference includes a section titled, quote, Russian activity directed at voting machine companies, close quote, which states that Russia also, quote, scanned a, quote, widely used vendor of U.S. election systems, close quote, before the 2016 election. But the name of the vendor is redacted, and the unredacted portion of the report does not explain what it means by scanned. While voters have been told there's, quote, no evidence that U.S. vote tallies were changed, no meaningful manual recount was conducted after the 2016 election because, among other reasons, most large Wisconsin counties refused. Michigan law made it impossible. The court in Pennsylvania blocked it, and some counties lacked paper ballots. In 2017, the Department of Homeland Security acknowledged that it had no forensic analysis to see if vote totals had been hacked, and said that it did not intend to do so in the future. I'm going to pause here. This is exactly why I tried to helm the Pacifica Network's election coverage with the intention of allying us with the C-SPAN reporters to have a way of having reporters on the ground and to be able to show evidence in that window of time between when the vote is finished and when the Electoral College votes. That's what's been happening. The 2000 election to 2004 election, there's not enough time. And so the opponent concedes, right? Because they're Democrats and Republicans functioning. He is a senator, John Kerry. He's not going to have a protracted argument here. So the concession happens. But when the concession happened, all of the media went and called Kerry the president. And I was saying, okay, no, let's not do that. And this was an intellectual exercise of a very high order that I've never been able to express properly because it has become just swamped by the notion that I was doing this for some stunt, which it was not. I spent the whole year creating a show about the mechanics of voting, which I hosted every Tuesday, a 10-minute thing on the radio. We had experts involved. We had reporters on the ground. I'm very confident that I proved, and if I had ever been called, or any of my reporters had, or the audio that we have, or the stories I have, signed, dated, and printouts from the time, we could show that Kerry won Ohio and won the election. So now, if I'm saying that, and we're talking here about election security, and one of the big issues is that little window of time is a huge issue, then we as Americans, I'm asking you all as a favor to MTK. That's really the only reason I'm saying it. Can we please not rush to judgment? Can we please leave it too close to call? Can we please wait? And if it's still too close to call 3 weeks after, which is what I did, 3 weeks after the election, if it's still too close to call, nobody should be calling it. And if the Electoral College vote is within, say, like it was that year, December 6th, a few weeks, then Congress should bang the gavel and say, we'd like a 3-month extension to investigate the election. This has been done before. It would not be historic. There's no, well, uh, it would become historic because it'll be part of the digital world. That's everything. Also the successive amount of historicness that we're adding to everything. But if that window of time is so important and all this stuff is going on, we need to extend that window of time and put the president in March. And that, I think, is a very important thing to think about now. We should have a bill in Congress now. Either a Republican or a Democrat should be able to agree with this. If it's going to be this partisan all the way down to the wire, then both of you should be able to agree to this, I feel like. We're going to return now to Jennifer Cohn's piece, which is sort of folding right into our own elections coverage. This is from the New York Review of Books. Continuing now. Election security expert Professor Rich DeMillo of the Georgia Institute of Technology says that, quote, like all voting machines, BMDs receive programming before each election via memory cards or USB sticks prepared on centralized election management computers systems that are likely connected to the internet on occasion, close quote. Thus, a hacker or corrupt insider could transfer malware to every BMD within the county or state by compromising either these centralized computers or the memory cards or the USB sticks. Election security expert Professor Alex J. Halderman of the University of Michigan agrees that election management systems, quote, sometimes are connected to the internet or the data that's programmed into them passes through an internet-connected system, close quote, at some point. So that, quote, we're just one or two hops away from an online attacker, close quote. As he testified to the House Appropriations Subcommittee earlier this year, quote, hackers who compromise an election management system can spread a voter stealing attack to large numbers of machines, close quote. Moreover, he says that, quote, a small number of election technology vendors and support contractors program and operate election management systems used by many local governments. The largest of these services, over 2,000 jurisdictions, spread across 34 states. Attackers could target one or a few of these companies and spread an attack to election equipment, including BMDs, that serves millions of voters, close quote. Last week, Democratic Senators Elizabeth Warren, Ron Wyden, and Amy Klobuchar, and Representative Mark Pocan, Democrat of Wisconsin, announced that they have opened an investigation into the vulnerabilities and shortcomings of election technology industry with ties to private equity, close quote. The reason the issue of private equity matters is that the top two vendors of these ballot marking machines, Election Systems and Software LLC, that's ESNS, and Dominion Voting, account for more than 80% of U.S. election equipment. They thus hold between them a near monopoly on the industry, and their form of ownership means there is no way of discovering the details of who really owns them, or even whether they are legitimate competitors. And now here, Ms. Cohn hits directly on what I think we were looking at in the early stages of this in 2004. And again, I would love to be called, and I would love data from those days to be involved in anyone who wants to help me, MTK, cover the mechanics of voting in the new year. We've come to the first break in this piece, and so we're just going to take a second and listen to some music here. I think you all will remember the tune. word. You never said a word. It's all going to shit now, and you never say a word. The elections are fixed. Oh. The wars are endless. The surveillance is total, and you never say a word. You never said a word. You never said a word. It's all going to shit now, and you never say a word. Totally ruined that with the beep, 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 beep sounds of my device here. But hey, you get the basic gist. The elections are fixed. The wars are endless. The surveillance is total, and you never say a word. That's the chorus of that song, the hit single, You Never Say a Word, from the popular program, A Middle Perch Live. We are reading today Jennifer Cohn's piece in the New York Review of Books. She is an attorney, an election integrity advocate, and a writer. You can find her on Twitter at Jenny Cohn1. That's JENNY COHN1. And I'll add that to the description here. Just double checking that we're still rolling and we're at the half hour mark. Great. Let's continue. We're learning about ESS, one of these companies here, and Dominion voting. We're going to learn about ES&S. ES&S was founded in the 1970s by two brothers, Bob and Todd Urosevich of Omaha, Nebraska. It could be Urosevich, Urosevich, of Omaha, Nebraska, in the 70s. In July 2000, Bob Urosevich was named president of another vendor, Global Election Systems. Its largest shareholder and senior vice president as of September 2000 was a convicted embezzler named Jeffrey Dean, whose crimes involved computer tampering. Whoa. Bob Urosevich one of the two brothers who founded ES&S in July of 2000 was named president of another vendor, Global Election Systems. And that one, Global Election Systems, its largest shareholder and senior vice president, as of September 2000, was a convicted embezzler named Jeffrey Dean, whose crimes involved computer tampering. In 2002, ATM manufacturer Diebold Incorporated acquired Global and changed its name to Diebold Election Systems. Diebold told the Associated Press that Dean had left the company, but internal Diebold memos showed that he had remained as a consultant. Dean's involvement with Global/Diebold was unearthed by Bev Harris, author of Black Box Voting, Ballot Tampering in the 21st Century, 2004. Bev Harris, author of Black Box Voting, Ballot Tampering in the 21st Century, 2004. Dean's whereabouts today are unknown, Ms. Cohn writes. I have to make an editorial aside. In the summer of 2004, in my Mechanics of Voting program on KPFK, and which was subsequently throughout the network, sent in pieces to people who wanted to put them anywhere. So New York, DC, Houston, Bay Area, the produced piece could be sent around and was. In that, I interviewed Bev Harris, the woman who did unearth the involvement of Dean at that time, and had her on the program. I had her on first when it was happening. I had her on later in the summer to talk more about them, ask her questions. She was doing detailed work about what was going on. I thought, let's have her on. So she was on the air with me, I think 3 times on that program. That show was called Elections Hotwire, by the way, many, many years ago. It's nice to see that she managed to publish that work into a book, and I can say she's someone you should definitely read. But this is historical here, and we're talking now about Dean, that person being gone from this situation, and how ES&S is what it is today. So Dean's involvement with Global/Diebold was unearthed by Bev Harris. Diebold sold its election subsidiary to ES&S in 2009. Okay. But in 2010, the Department of Justice's Antitrust Division forced ES&S to sell some of Diebold's assets because the combined company accounted for more than 70% of U.S. election equipment. Dominion Voting, a Canadian company that outsources some of its programming to Serbia, bought those assets that same year, Dominion Voting, as well as another smaller vendor named Sequoia Voting. We covered them back in 2004. In recent years, ES&S has made a series of misleading statements about remote access to some of its election systems and internet connectivity. For its part, Dominion won't say if it has installed remote access software in its systems or not. You're following. Experts agree that all computerized election equipment, including ballot counting machines, scanners, and central tabulators, and these new ballot marking machines, can be hacked. But the opportunities for hacking are fewer when only counting machines are used. Universal use ballot marking devices are an unnecessary electronic addition to the existing systems, not a substitute for them. And thus they increase the exposure of the system to potential cyber attack. The ability to detect and recover from any such attack is critical to election integrity. Any effort at forensic analysis to detect a possible security breach, however, is typically hampered or prevented by vendors' claim of proprietary ownership of their software. This is what the former presidential candidate John Kerry discovered when he requested a forensic analysis of equipment before the 2004 election, and his court petition was denied. Election security experts including Halderman, say that sophisticated hackers could erase forensic evidence in any case. They also say that a machine recount, which merely reruns potentially hacked voting equipment, would be unlikely to detect evidence of tampering. Instead, they advise that if we want to detect hacking, we should conduct a manual recount or audit, such as a risk-limiting audit that compares paper ballots with electronic outcomes. But as Professor Philip Stark, the inventor of risk-limiting audits, has explained, comparing paper ballots to reported electronic outcomes can only detect hacking of ballot counting machines, these scanners and tabulators. It cannot detect similar interference in ballot marking machines, that is BMDs, the things we're talking about. Likewise, although a careful accounting of the chain of custody between election night and the audit can provide reliable evidence that hand-marked paper ballots are trustworthy source documents for conducting an audit, it cannot certify this for machine-marked paper ballots because it cannot detect hacking of BMDs, right? So that the hacked data would just be counted. Ballot marking systems can also have problems with the touch screen interface. Hypersensitivity or hyposensitivity, inability to fit all candidates on a single screen, and miscalibration resulting in vote flipping. That has all been proven. These are all links, and that's the stuff I was saying on the air. I was the only journalist in America saying we should stop, and it's all been proven. And I don't know how else to tell you that I want to get back into this in the new election, and I want to be very clear about who I am, so there's no mistake. I am a nonpartisan investigator into American elections with a degree from the University of Texas, and I've worked in politics and been a journalist in politics. That's the reason I'm doing this. And why I'm editorializing and reading these long form things here is because I can. I've created a space where I can do that. It's not radio anymore. But the vote flipping happened because the screens, the touchscreen interface, and they can shut down or fail to activate while in use, the touchscreens can, disenfranchising voters or creating long lines at polling stations, which has resulted in disenfranchisement of another kind. Last month in Georgia, for example, BMDs could not be activated without functioning electronic poll books used to confirm voter registrations and create BMD access cards at the polling place, which didn't work, causing significant delays. We've been down this road before. After problems with punch cards in the 2000 presidential election and the GOP's successful campaign to stop a manual recount, Congress passed the Help America Vote Act of 2002, ushering in a generation of glitchy, vote-flipping DREs, the direct record electronic touchscreen voting machines. We've talked about these before. Initially, many of these machines were paperless, which, in addition to problems with vote flipping and electronic failure, made manual recounts and manual audits impossible. Despite this, some such machines remain in use today. Voter verifiable paper audit trails, cash register style rolls of paper attached to touchscreen voting machines were a popular industry response to concerns about paperless voting. The assumption was that voters would verify that the voting machines had correctly marked their selections on the VVPATs, which would then be used to conduct meaningful manual audits. A series of later studies, however, proved these assumptions to be incorrect. A 2004 video study of voters during an election in Nevada found that fewer than 40% of voters reviewed the machine's VVPAT printout to check whether their vote had been accurately marked. In 2005, a study conducted by Professor Ted Selker and Sharon Cohn of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology of MIT found that, quote, out of 108 mock elections that contained VVPAT errors, no errors were reported by the participants, and only 8% of the participants agreed with the statement that there had been errors. Selker of MIT has explained how a malicious actor might thus commit fraud. Okay. In a more likely scenario, the defrauder will change the electronic ballot and depend on the statistics for reading and contesting bad receipts. If a person calls their receipt into question and asks for another receipt to be printed, the hacked VVPT machine can print the duplicate receipt correctly, fixing the mistake. By printing the correct receipt when a person asks for it a second time, it could literally eliminate the changed ballot, thus eliminating the possibility of detection. Although the program has to give up this one changed ballot, it won't happen often. Close quote. The findings of the 2004 and 2005 VVPAT studies, by the way, VVPAT, I assume you guys understand, are voter verifiable paper audit trails, right? The findings of the 2004 and 2005 VVPAT studies have been reinforced by similar subsequent ones. In 2007, a Rice University study of a mock election reported that a clear majority of study participants did not notice that the voting machines had added to, deleted, or switched their selections, even though this was apparent on the review screen. According to the report, quote, over 60% of voters do not notice if their votes, as shown on the review screen, are different than how they were selected. Over 60% that was. Entire races can be added or removed from ballots, and voters' candidate selections can be flipped, and the majority of users do not notice, close quote. In 2008, Professor Doug Jones of the University of Iowa conducted a study that found in a mock election, 1/3 of voters instructed to verify a voting machine review screen did not notice that the screen had switched their selections at the top of the ticket from Obama to McCain, or vice versa. And a majority of those who did notice, assumed that the discrepancy was caused by their own error in using the machine, as opposed to a problem with the machine itself. These and other concerns with touchscreen voting systems, including reports of vote flipping, have persuaded most experts to instead recommend hand-marked paper ballots, which do not interpose an insecure machine between voters and their ballots. Hand-marked paper ballots can also, quote, help reduce lines at the polls, allowing workers to quickly set up additional voting stations, close quote, as ES&S itself recently acknowledged. Touch screens tend to create longer lines because they limit the number of voters who can mark their ballots concurrently to the number of machines at the polling place, which can create a bottleneck. As of 2016, however, about a quarter of the country still used either paperless touchscreen voting machines or touchscreen voting machines with unsatisfactory, quote, voter verifiable paper trails. So not really. They're unsatisfactory voter verifiable. So a quarter of the country we're talking about still used either the paperless ones, touchscreen voting, or the touchscreen ones with unsatisfactory voter verifiable paper trails. The rest of the country, that's 3/4 of the country, still used primarily hand-marked paper ballots and scanners. That was 2016. Ballot marking devices, which cost nearly twice as much as hand-marked paper ballots and scanners, are the latest industry gambit to put machines between voters and their ballots. These BMDs, these ballot marking devices. Although they've been around for years to assist voters with disabilities, and they should remain available for this purpose, the new versions are intended for use by all voters regardless of need. Most generate a paper summary card rather than a full-face ballot. No studies suggest that these summary cards are any better than the previous generation of machines that produced a supposedly voter verifiable paper record. On the contrary, one recent study from 2018, it's awaiting peer review, so this is very fresh stuff, found that most voters did not review them, even when instructed to do so. And of those who did, most didn't notice changes on the face of the cards. So the belief in the mind of the voter must be just so secure that even when the mind is looking at the thing, they're not noticing it, or they're not looking. Amazing to think about. Experts caution that some of these BMDs, the ES&S Express Vote XL and the Dominion ICE, the ES&S Express Vote XL and Dominion ICE can be programmed to give voters the option to forego printing and reviewing the printout at all. Do you want to print out? No. They also warn that even if this option is disabled, the machines can be maliciously programmed to add fraudulent marks to the machine marked printout after it's been inspected and the vote cast. That's amazing to think about, guys. And Russia, come on. Impeach the president. Another concern is that almost all new BMDs place a large barcode or matrix-style QR code above the human-readable text on the summary card. The barcode, which humans can't, of course, read, is the only part of the ballot counted as their vote. According to election security expert Richard DeMilo, a professor of computer science at Georgia Tech, quote, malevolent actors could manipulate the barcodes to do various things, such as instructing the scanners to flip votes, and voters would have no idea, close quote. As Professor Jones lamented in an email to me, quote, we have a long-standing habit in the United States of adopting voting systems for use in the polling place without any real studies of how well they work. We only learn about human factors failings after the machines are deployed and widely used. We followed exactly this pattern with the move to touch-screen voting systems. We followed it again with the move to voter-verified paper trail add-on equipment for touchscreen machines, and we are following it again with ballot marking device technology, the BMDs that we began this article talking about. So why, given their inherent security problems, are these new ballot marking devices being taken up in more and more jurisdictions across the country? Proponents of these systems sometimes say they make it easier to retrieve ballot styles in multiple languages and eliminate stray marks, but ballot-on-demand printers can already print ballots in multiple languages at the polling place, and precinct scanners can alert voters to stray marks. During a recount in Minnesota in 2008, a bipartisan panel was able to agree on the intent of all but 14 hand-marked ballots out of 2.9 million. A bipartisan panel was able to agree on the intent of all but 14 ballots that were hand-marked out of 2.9 million. Ian Sancho, who served as supervisor of elections in Leon County, Florida for 18 years, told me that his successor, quote, uses a ballot-on-demand system, close quote, for early voting sites, which produces a, quote, full ballot in English or Spanish for the voter to mark by hand and drop in the tabulator. This procedure does not use BMDs, except for those who cannot mark the ballot by hand, close quote. According to Sancho, open quote, those who push BMDs ignore current available technologies, which are simple to use and completely auditable, as well as truly being voter verifiable, as the voter sees what the scanner is counting, not barcodes or QR codes, close quote. As with so much in American politics, following the money sheds light on the motivation of some of the election officials choosing these systems. It makes quite an audit trail of its own. In 2018, the McClatchy News Agency broke a story that ES&S, quote, has at least 9 years coaxed state and elections officials, has for at least 9 years. ES&S, quote, has for at least 9 years coaxed state and local elections officials to serve on an advisory board that gathers twice annually for company-sponsored conferences, including one last year at a ritzy Las Vegas resort hotel, close quote. In 2017, as many as a dozen election officials attended ES&S's Las Vegas event, for which they accepted, quote, airfare, lodging, meals, and, according to one participant, a ticket to a show on the Strip, close quote. The event also included an open bar and recreational outings. In 2019, it was reported that South Carolina's Election Commission Director, Marcy Andino, had accepted nearly $20,000 in expenses during her decade as a member of ES&S's advisory board. The state has since signed a $51 million contract for ES&S express vote ballot markers and scanners, ignoring concerns raised by the South Carolina League of Women Voters. New York City's top election official, who also sat on ES&S's secret gift-giving advisory board, from 2014 until December 2018, wants to buy ES&S's Express Vote XL machines for early voting, and is pushing the state election board to certify them, despite warnings from election security experts. New York City's top election official. The board has already certified Dominion ICE, the ICE ones we talked about, Dominion ones, ballot marking devices, again, despite their warnings. In Texas, a Dallas County election administrator named Tony Pippins Poole, who attended the ES&S event in Las Vegas, asked ES&S to pay for campaign campaign t-shirts and buttons, which the company agreed to do, writing, quote, "In the past, we simply wrote a check to Tony. We can send a check made out to you, Tony, for the $1,500 amount," close quote. That was in 2017. In 2019, the county inked a $30 million contract with ES&S for new Express Vote ballot marking devices, BMDs. Another Texas county, Harris County, the largest in the state, is currently soliciting vendor proposals for new machines. In North Carolina, election integrity advocates and experts tried to stop the state from certifying Express Vote BMDs, ballot marking devices, from ES&S, whose agent in the state is a company called Printellect. Printellect is owned by Owen Andrews, who has reportedly donated to state officials for years. In August 2019, the state certified the system despite security concerns. And Mecklenburg County, the most populous county in North Carolina, promptly decided to buy it. On December 6, however, journalist Jordan Wilkie, writing for the Carolina Public Press, reported that ES&S had asked the state to, quote, administratively, close quote, approve a different version without certification testing because it said it wouldn't have enough units of the certified version to satisfy demand. The state granted the request on December 15th, despite a firestorm of criticism from election integrity advocates and experts who advised that the new system is even more concerning than the one initially certified, and that the system will cost substantially more than hand-marked paper ballots and scanners. In early 2019, Pennsylvania Auditor General Eugene DePasquale, this is in early this year, Pennsylvania Auditor General Eugene DePasquale reported that election officials in at least 18 Pennsylvania counties had accepted donations or other gifts from voting machine vendors. Philadelphia then proceeded to ignore experts and election integrity advocates by choosing ES&S Express Vote XL ballot marking devices. The Philadelphia Comptroller, the city's official finance watchdog, later discovered that ES&S lobbyists had donated to the decision makers' campaigns, providing grounds to cancel the contract. The city fined ES&S $2.9 million for failing to disclose the lobbyists' donations, but reaffirmed the contract. So they paid a fine of $3 million. And these machines rolled on. Other Pennsylvania counties followed Philadelphia's lead, including Northampton County, where XL machines failed so spectacularly in voting last month that they had to be cracked open so that the machine-marked printouts could be counted on different machines, revealing that, quote, a candidate that the XL showed getting just 15 votes had won by about 1,000, close quote. Some voters during that election also reported that the machines were hypersensitive, quote unquote, and mysteriously, quote, defaulted, close quote, to the Republican Party. One such voter, quoted by the New York Times, said, quote, I walked into my booth and I knew that I was going to vote straight Democratic, and I'm voting that way until we get some balance back into the government. But when I hit straight Democratic, straight Republican is what registered, close quote. A post-mortem examination of the machines concluded, among other things, that dozens of them, quote, weren't properly calibrated, close quote, even though an ES&S representative had previously claimed during a sales pitch in Lebanon County, Pennsylvania, that, quote, you don't have to worry about calibration. There is a calibration routine, but I've never had to use it. Scout's honor, close quote. As Bloomberg reported, Republican officials in Northampton County were no less skeptical of the machines, A local party chairwoman, quote, said the results can't be trusted and the experience has shaken voters' trust. Quote within quote, we think voters were disenfranchised, she said. In the wake of the Northampton County debacle, critics of the new devices have formally requested for a second time that the state decertify the system. That request is still pending, as is a lawsuit filed on December 13, which seeks to enjoin the use of these systems in the state. California has jumped on the ballot marking bandwagon as well. Los Angeles County, the largest county in the U.S., has built its own $300 million QR code ballot marking system in partnership with voting machine vendor Smartmatic. Although the county had boasted that its system would be, quote, open source, a public records request for the code was reportedly denied. Election security expert Alex Halderman recently told Fortune magazine that the system, quote, raises its own security questions that I don't think LA County has yet satisfactorily addressed, close quote. In Georgia, election integrity advocates managed to stop state lawmakers from passing a bill in 2018. This would have been SB 403 that would have enabled universal use ballot marking devices, universal use BMDs in Georgia. But lawmakers went ahead and passed a new bill, HB 316, enabling them in 2019. Georgia has since purchased BMDs from Dominion, whose lobbyist Jared Thomas was Georgia Governor Brian Kemp's chief of staff and press records secretary from 2012 to 2015, when Kemp was Secretary of State, the one who runs the election. Dominion's partner in the state is No Inc., a supplier of, that's KNOWINK, No Inc., a supplier of electronic poll books, which are used to sign in voters and confirm voter registrations. No Inc.'s founder and CEO, Scott Leindecker, is a former Republican election official whose wife donated $2,500 to the campaign of Georgia's current Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, in November of 2018. During a test election of Georgia's new voting system last month, the No Inc. e-poll books failed in 4 out of 6 counties. Although a federal court had ordered Georgia to have paper voter registration lists as backups, they did no good because the ballot marking devices, the BMDs, were set up so that they could not be activated without functioning electronic poll books. Even after that problem resolved, some ballot marking devices, these BMDs, cycled on and off while in use. Consistent with the earlier, quote, human factor studies that we talked about, observers during that election, including Professor Rich DeMilo of Georgia Tech, reported that most voters did not review the ballot marking device printouts. The Coalition for Good Governance, a nonpartisan election integrity nonprofit, has already obtained a landmark federal court ruling banning Georgia's current paperless voting machines. The group's ultimate goal is to bring hand-marked paper ballots to Georgia, with ballot marking devices, BMDs, the ones we're talking about, for those voters who are unable to hand mark, only for those voters who are unable to hand mark. I think we're at the hour mark, and we're going to take a little pause right now. Let's listen to our hit single again, why don't we, since we're talking about this stuff today. You never say a word. And we are listening to some music at some breaks as we consider and read aloud Jennifer Cohn in the New York Review of Books, whose piece, How New Voting Machines Could Hack Our Democracy, has come out today. And I'm going to put a link to it in the bottom here. Just finished the second third of the piece. The last bit is a little bit shorter. We'll get to that in just a moment here. Short break. You never said a word. You never said a word. It's all going to shit now. never say a word. The elections are fixed. The wars are endless. The surveillance is total, and you never say a word. You never said a word. You never said a word. It's all going to shit now, and you never say a word. Sorry for the abrupt ending. The little fader makes a weird beeping noise that I despise. Let's wrap this piece up by Jennifer Cohn of the New York Review of Books. Again, you can find her at JENNYCOHN1 on Twitter. In this quest, however, election integrity advocates face a tough battle, not only at state level, but also in Congress. ES&S and Dominion both donated to Kentucky's senior senator and Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell's campaign earlier this year. McConnell subsequently agreed to an appropriation of $250 million for purported election security funding that actually mandated no election security requirements whatsoever. Senator Ron Wyden, Democrat of Oregon, who supports hand-marked paper ballots, has called this funding, provided in an amendment to Senate Bill 2524, a, quote, sham, noting that the money, quote, can be used for anything relating to elections, including giving states taxpayer dollars to buy insecure voting machines, close quote. Verified Voting, that's the group I told you back in the day, I saw them born, and we interviewed them initially. But now I'm learning more about what's been happening with them since from this piece. Verified Voting, a powerful national organization that lobbies Congress and states for election security reform, and once supported voter verifiable paper audit machines, has called McConnell's new no-strings funding bill a, quote, step in the right direction, close quote. Verified Voting's president has also misrepresented ballot marking devices' capacity to provide reliable evidence for a risk-limiting audit that electronic outcomes are legitimate. I didn't know that. Verified Voting's president has also misrepresented ballot marking devices' capacity, those are BMD's capacity, to provide reliable evidence for a risk-limiting audit that electronic outcomes are legitimate. On November 21st, 2019, just a few weeks ago, Professor Stark resigned from Verified Voting's board of directors in protest, citing such repeated, quote, false, unquote, representations by the organization. which he says have served to gloss over the failure of multiple jurisdictions to satisfy the, quote, fundamental requirement of a, quote, trustworthy paper trail, close quote. Stark wrote that the organization has, in effect, said, quote, don't worry, VV will teach you to sprinkle magic RLA dust and fantasies about parallel testing on your untrustworthy election. All will be fine. You can use our authority and reputation to silence your critics, close quote. On December 1st, just 16 days ago, a second expert, Professor DeMillo, resigned from verified voting, citing similar concerns regarding the organization's unpredictable and contradictory policy statements regarding universal use BMDs. These are those things we're talking about, and what a risk-limiting audit can accomplish with BMD printouts as opposed to hand-marked paper ballots. So 2 have resigned in the past month from verified voting. The Securing America's Federal Election Act, the SAFE Act, Senate 2238, which was written primarily by Wyden, is the only federal legislation that would ban at least some ballot marking machine systems in 2020, those that count votes with barcodes, which applies to most of the current systems, and hybrids that can add machine marks to the printouts after they are cast, such as the ES&S Express Vote XL and the Dominion ICE. The SAFE Act would also mandate that jurisdictions give voters the option to hand mark their ballots in 2020, although it would allow them to satisfy this requirement with vote by mail. It would not require that polling places give voters the hand marking option, an omission that concerns some advocates. It would, however, require that jurisdictions conduct risk-limiting audits for federal elections held within 1 year of the date of enactment of the act. Yesterday, House and Senate negotiators reached a deal to increase the previously agreed upon election security funding to $425 million. As before, this funding, which is presumably a part of Senate 2524, includes no election security conditions. If voters want the bill to exclude funding of DRE touchscreens, voting machines, and ballot marking devices, the BMDs, with an exception for voters with disabilities, the time to tell their senators and representatives is now. The stakes couldn't be higher. Voting machines that make it difficult or impossible to detect hacking can leave voters susceptible not only to stolen elections, but to false claims of election rigging. That is a high price to pay for unnecessary electronic pens. Filed this morning at 9:46 a.m. by Jennifer Cohn. That's spelled Cohn. In the New York Review of Books. You can find her at Jenny Cohn 1, JENNYCOHN 1 on Twitter. I'm MTK on the MIC. These are the last of these programs. This has been a Middle Perch. Just 2 weeks left in the year, folks. So I guess we're starting to see what MTK 2020 is going to be about, and a lot of it, or a portion of it, or some of it, certainly in detail, is going to be about elections. I'm going to make an elections list. Hey, let's make an election